Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's video. This week I wanted to talk to you about succession sowing for your flower seeds. So that is sowing little batches of seeds regularly throughout the growing season so that you get flowers from the very start of the season in May time right through to the first frost. And it takes a little bit of learning how to succession sow. I know that when I started growing flowers 9 years ago, I had absolutely no idea about succession sowing. I started off in 2014 by sowing seeds, like the seed packets say, in the springtime, in about late April, actually, I think I did it that first year. And I didn't get flowers until we came back from our holidays in August. They lasted about a month, 6 weeks, and then they were over for the season. I didn't have any other flowers. So I knew that I had to learn about how you can extend your season on either side. And over the years, I've got better at doing it, but it's still something that you need to work on and learn about every year because it's specific to your garden and your climate. And it's really especially helpful to make notes. I've got a garden diary that I write down in every week what's happening, what I've been sowing, what's flowering. And I can look back at that over the years and it gives me a good indication as to when to grow my different flowers. So, succession sowing. I'm going to show you today what I've got at the different stages already in the garden and when I sowed them and when I think that they'll flower. And I'm going to show you as well a calendar that I have printed out and marked on it specific things like my last frost date that helps me work out when to do my different succession sowing. So we'll go and have a look at that in a minute as well. So the idea behind today is that I'm going to share with you my tips for succession sowing and how I do it. And then you can hopefully translate that to your own gardens and flower farms. And then hopefully you'll be able to get flowers right from when the annuals first get going in May time, right through to whenever you get your first frost. So let's go down into the flower patch and the greenhouse and see the different batches that I have got going and what my plan is going forwards from here in May. So this is what I've put together for my hardy annuals. It's my succession sowing schedule and it's giving me an idea of when to sow seeds. So how have I worked this out? So one of the best ways of working out succession sowing is by just having a look at the year in a calendar. So I've just printed this out because then I can draw on it and that really helps me to work out what I'm doing when. So one of the first things that you want to do is you want to mark on it where your first and last frosts are in the year. So from my garden diaries that I've been jotting things down in for the last couple of years, I can show you that here just now. This is one of my garden record books and I just jot things down in it every week. So I'll show you at the back some of the pages that haven't been filled in yet, but it just has things like weather this week, plant activity, what to keep in mind for the future. And I can jot down in there what is happening with our weather, what seeds I'm sowing, what flowers I'm harvesting. And it's really helpful for working out what I'm doing year to year. So I've looked back for the last few years in my book and I've marked on when my frosts have been. So you can see down here I have got these in green highlighter and they are quite variable. So I've had frosts as early as the 21st of September and I've had them as late as at the end of October, here on the 29th of October. So that's just looking at the last 5 years there. So there's a good several weeks spread there of when I can have my frosts. And I remember that when we had it in the 21st of September, that just took out all the dahlias overnight, took out the cosmos, and very little came through that. So that can spell the end of my flower season. Or I can be lucky and I can get another 6 weeks and still be making bouquets up very end of October, even sometimes occasionally with some of the flowers into early November. But I want a guarantee of flowers for September really. And I want them to start flowering. Flowers normally will give you a good 4 to 6 weeks of blooming from plants when they get going. So what I'm looking at is I'm wanting to have flowers that are starting around about the beginning of September for me. And then that'll get them really going then and bloom all the way through here and into October when my flower season ends. And I don't generally mind too much whether things are slowing down a bit by October, November, because the weather has changed so much then that we get a lot of storms, we got a lot of wind and rain. And even though I might still have flowers, from a frost point of view, the quality of the petals and things can often be damaged by the weather that we're getting. So September is what I'm aiming for, and I need to work back from here to work out when I should be doing my sowing of my seeds. So all flowers are a little bit different. You need to look at your seed packets, and it will say quite often on them how long it takes from sowing the seeds through to them flowering. And sometimes it'll say 12 weeks, sometimes it'll say 14 weeks. And I normally are on the side of caution here in Scotland. We're not that hot, so things don't necessarily always get going that quickly. So I would always add maybe a couple of weeks to that maturity that it's given you. So if it says 12 weeks, I would say for me, definitely 14, just to get things flowering properly. And some things are faster than that. Some things will be more like 60, 90 days. But standard annuals and things for me, probably definitely between 12 and 14 weeks. So I need to count back. I want to have my flowers starting around about this first week of September. And if I count back through my calendar and you go back about 14 weeks, you are getting to the start of June. So I know there that that's going to be the last time that I'm going to be sowing some of my hardy annuals. Now I start off as well, you've got to think about when you're going to be starting your flower sowing in the year. And if you remember from watching any of my cool flower videos, you'll know that I start my hardy annuals off in the early autumn, end of the summer, early autumn time, and I try and overwinter them. And that will give me flowers in May every year. So my first ever sowings in the year are after the school holidays have finished, and it's normally the end of August, beginning of September. So I've marked this in purple here. That is where I'm going to be doing my very first batch. So now we've worked that out. Very first batch of hardy annuals only is done end of August, beginning of September, and overwintered. And my very last batch of hardy annuals is going to be sown at the very start of June. And then we need to work out how many successions we need to be doing in between those first and last sowings. So for hardy annuals, these are ones that don't mind a little bit of cool weather. So you can start them off earlier in the year, plant them out earlier, and they'll grow away fine for you. Anything more tender, you can't start off too early because you can't plant them out until after your last frost date. So for hardy annuals, cool hardy annuals, first batch is going to be here in August, and then I start again in late February when we're up to 10 hours of daylight to get my seedlings doing well after germination. So that tends to be around about this 13th onwards of February, and that's still quite early days. I might start with some sweet peas and things then, possibly some cornflowers and things, but it'll be over the next couple of weeks that I'll be really starting. So that can be your first batch. Then I'm looking to be sowing about every month for my hardy annuals so that I get a succession of flowers. So I would sow again a month later in March, a month later in April, a month later in May, and then those final lot in June. So that's quite a lot of succession sowings. You may find that things don't work out as much as that. You're maybe going to get slower germination at the beginning of the year, or I might not have started anything just there. I might have started more at the beginning of March with some seeds. It just depends what's happening with the weather and the garden and things. So that might just be one batch between the two of them. Definitely we'll do more in April at some stage. Then we're into tulip time and harvesting, and that really can take up a lot of your day. And you might find that you're doing so much work with arranging and harvesting that you're just skipping these dates a bit. It's a struggle to get these in May. But that's why it's really good to have a calendar like this with things marked down, because it can be a reminder. You can just jot in your diary, need to get another batch of hardy annuals on here so that you're going to get flowers later on in the year. So the aim is, by doing these batches, is that you're going to get flowers all through from May, June, July, August, September and into October. So now we know how we have worked out our succession sowing schedule, let's go and have a look at it in real life. So we know that batch 1 of our hardy annuals I started after the school summer holidays had finished last August and into early September. Now, very unfortunately, we did have that very freezing spell in December, so I did lose 3/4 of my hardy annual last year, but some did make it, and this is what they're looking like now. They're all planted outside. So these are my cornflowers, which are not far away now. They're starting to put on a lot of growth, and they'll grow up through this horizontal netting over the next few weeks. And I think by the end of May we should have cornflowers. This is our Leah that also overwintered well. So we've got quite a lot of this out in the garden, and that's what I need to be staking and netting in the next week so that it can start growing up through it. Because now we've got warm weather, it's really starting to grow. I managed to get some corn cockles through as well. Again, these will all flower at the end of May, and into June they'll be really getting going and giving me those first hardy annual flowers. And we've got some Daucus as well, and also some Phacelia. Now these autumn sown ones are really strong plants, really good root systems, and they will be really tall with lots and lots of flowers once they get going. But eventually, by the end of July, you'll find that these have flowered their socks off and are starting to slow down. For cutting quality stems for flower arranging, you need to be having some new plants on the go. So if I'd only planted this one batch in the autumn, I would not have flowers throughout my whole growing season. So let's have a look at batch number 2. So batch number 2 is what I was sowing at the very end of February and the start of March. So some of these are actually the beginning of March that I'm going to show you just now, that are planted out in the garden as well at this stage. So here's some examples of batch 2 sowings. So these were done in very early March, and then they were planted out at the very end of April. So these are cornflowers here. You can see that they're under some netting at the moment, and the reason that they are is because pigeons in my garden love young fresh growth and will come and nibble away at them to the detriment of the plant, sometimes so much so that there's just not much left. So until they're stronger and more robust, the netting will stay on, and then I'll stake and put the horizontal netting in for support. You can also see that I've got some sweet peas here. Now I lost all my sweet peas in my autumn sowings due to those very, very freezing temperatures in December. So unfortunately I have lost my batch 1 of those. So this is batch 2 and that were sown in February. So I'll have slightly later sweet peas this year than normal, but by June they should be flowering. I've also got some grasses here that you can see. Grasses are fantastic in arrangements, and I'll be doing a video on these later on in the year. But again, these are early sowings that I've been doing in late February and early March, and they got planted out in April as well. So these Orlea are a second batch. We've already got the overwintered Orlea outside as a first batch, which you saw earlier, and these ones were sown in March and planted outside late April. So they're a second batch, and I've got some more on the go in the greenhouse as well. Some things I just didn't get through the winter this year, and these included scabious. So these are a first batch for this year, but if I had overwintered successfully, they would have been a second batch. And I've got some Amimagus, that's the same. We lost all the overwintered ones in December, so these are the first ones I've got for this year. And then also we have got some salvia as well, and these are a first batch. So as you can see, when you lose your overwinter plants, then you're on the back foot a bit. You're going to get later flowers. If I'd managed to get those first batches of overwintered hardy annuals through, we would have had flowers by the end of May. As it is, we're going to be a bit behind with these second batch ones that are sown late February, early March, and they will flower for me in June this year. So I'll have lost a few weeks outside. So looking at batch 3 now, we're looking at what I have sown at the end of March, beginning of April, and these things are still in the greenhouse for me at the moment, nearly ready to get hardened out and planted out around about that last frost date towards the end of May. So these are salvia that I started at the beginning of April, and you can see that they're a little bit smaller than the ones planted outside, but they're still looking good, putting some growth on. Same with the maximise. These are just smaller than the ones that we've got outside, but will give us those later flowers. And here's some other successions I have done of my grasses. If you remember seeing those older batches outside, this is the newer ones I've got on now. So I'll probably do one more sowing of my grasses, and then that'll be it for the year, because they do take quite a while to establish. So you want them to have matured and be giving you the grasses that you need for bouquets before the end of the season. You don't want to have grown them and then them not reach maturity. So these are my second batch of sweet peas this year. They're looking really good in the greenhouse and can get hardened off now. It'll be cooler for them outside and they'll grow on better outside rather than the heat of the greenhouse. And these were put on in April, and they're a little bit smaller than the ones that are planted out outside, but there's not too much in it. These will be able to go out soon. So usually in a year I'd have 3 batches, one overwintered from the autumn, then one started in February time, one started in March, April time. This year I've just got 2 because I lost my autumn sown ones, so I'm swithering about whether to put on one final last batch of sweet peas just now for some of the later flowers in the year. So batch 4, it's all happening on the heated propagating bench. This is the seeds that I am sowing now. So I'm still sowing those hardy annuals. I've just put on some cornflowers this week, some corn cockles, some more scabious, some maximise. So I'm trying to get them all in now so that they will flower for me at the end of the season. So let's have a look under some of these humidity domes and see if anything has germinated from the seeds that I sowed at the end of last week. So this is my cornflowers, and I can actually just start to see some cornflowers germinating there. You might be able to see on the bottom right hand side there. So they are pretty fast, these cornflowers, especially with the heat at the moment. They get going really quickly within a week, which is great. These corn cockles are the same. They're really fast to get germinating. So it's quite good when you're succession, so you can get batches established quickly. I always find germination is much quicker at this time of year when you're seed sowing, so whether you're doing it directly outside or whether you're starting them off indoors. These salvia have come through really quickly within a week, whereas back in early March it was taking a good couple of weeks for them to germinate. And in approximately 10 to 12 weeks' time we'll have another lot of these lovely salvia flowering. So for some hardy annuals, batch 4 will be the last ones that I do, so that's the end of April, beginning of May. And the reason for this is that some hardy annuals take a long time to get from sowing the seed to flowering. It can be about 3.5 months. So things like maximise, Daucus, Bells of Ireland, those are all ones that take a long time for me. So I will finish them off at batch 4. Other hardy annuals like Phacelia and Nigella don't take as long to get from sowing to flowering, so those I can continue to batch sow. So they will also be sown in a further batch at the end of May, beginning of June. So what about more tender things? So tender things are things like your cosmos and your zinnias and your sunflowers, flowers that aren't going to manage to survive outside if there was a frost. So what you need to work out here is when your last frost is going to be in the year. And I've jotted down in green here, you can see some dates that I've had last frost in the last few years. So some years it can be really nice and warm and it can be as early as the 8th of May. Some years it can be right at the end of May. It can be around about the 27th of May. So to be absolutely safe, I always think that I can definitely be guaranteed success if I plant things out from the first week of June onwards. Can get away with it usually in the last week of May as well. And when you're planting tender things indoors to get them started, you don't want to start them too early because they're going to get too big too quickly and not easy to look after, and can get root bound in their pots, and so you want to start them probably a maximum about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. And so for me, I'm going to say that I could be planting things out the last week of May. That's probably fairly safe for some of my tender annuals. So it normally takes me a bit longer. I wouldn't say things are getting going really quickly for me in 4 weeks. I think to get them established little plants, 6 weeks is better for me. So I'm going to count 6 weeks back, and that'll tell me when I can start doing these tender annual sowings. So we go about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So from that, I know that around the 10th of April, that week there, is a good time for me to start my first batches of my more tender plants. And if I sow my first batches there, then I know that they will be flowering for me by July. And then flowers will usually be really good quality and keep going for a good 4 to 6 weeks. But after that, they'll start to reduce in stem length, number of flowers and things. So if we have a look through July, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, I would say by the beginning of August, they'll be starting to peter out. So if you'd only done that one batch in April, you wouldn't then be getting any flowers through the end of August and into September. So we know we need to do some more batches of sowing tender annuals. So I would then look on about 3-4 weeks later, I would do another batch. And then I would count forward again and I'd do another batch here in June. Now you can see I've got a little bit more pink coming up here. And that is because of things like my sunflowers. So every 3 to 4 weeks I would be doing batches of my tender annuals, but if there was ones like sunflowers which come very quickly, you can get seed to flowering within about 60 days, then I'll need to put more batches of these on. Especially things like my pro-cut sunflowers, which are just single stems. So to keep a good production line going, because they're not cut and come again, then you need to keep sowing new batches. So they would be done every couple of weeks. And other things for me, like Nigella, it's normally fairly fast, about 90 days or so for Nigella to flower from seed, and Buplerium as well. Things like that you need to keep using a lot of and don't produce really good branching come again stems. You need to keep sowing these. So things like that I would sow more regularly. So tender annuals, this is my seed sowing schedule for those, and they don't tend to get as many sowings as my hardy annuals do. So they're going to flower later on in the season anyway, because you're starting them later. So you don't have as many chances to get succession flowers through. So for the hardy annuals, you want a few successions because they're starting to flower in May, whereas these tender annuals are only starting to flower for me in July. So I'll probably do just a couple of sowings of these. So you can see here that at the top I've got batch 1 and batch 2. These are all my tender annuals, things like my cosmos and my zinnias and things. But then I've still got some 3, 4, 5 and 6 batches there. And that's for things like your sunflowers that don't take very long at all to go from germinating to flowering, about 60 days. So I can get in much more succession sowings of those and get flowers at the end of the season. So this is what my mid-April sowings of Cosmos look like. That's my first batch for this year. They're starting to put on lots of nice leafy growth. It won't be long before they'll need pinching out. They're a little bit away from that just now. I'm just waiting for a few more sets of true leaves and then I'll pinch them back. And then I'll start to get them hardened off and they'll get planted out around about the last week in May. Here's my first batch of zinnias. So they're starting to grow away and starting to develop their true leaves. I'll need to get another batch of these on now, so that's a job for this week to get the next batch of zinnias on. Here's my first pro-cut sunflowers that are coming along nicely there, so they germinate very, very quickly. And I do start these off inside. You don't have to, you can direct sow a lot of things at this time of year, but I like to protect them inside, get them a little bit larger before I plant out, and then they're more robust against the birds and slugs and snails in the garden. I will be planting these sunflower seeds every couple of weeks until mid-July now, and that will give me a succession of sunflowers right through from July up until the end of September. So because I just started my tender annuals off in mid-April, I am just at the stage now of starting off batch 2. I've got a few cosmos that have started to germinate already, but I need to do some catching up this week and get some more zinnias and sunflowers started. I haven't grown amaranthus for a few years either, so I'm going to have a shot at growing that as well. I need to get some of those sowed this week too. And then it's just keeping on top of remembering every 2 weeks to put a new batch of sunflower seeds on so that I'll get sunflowers right through to September. So this for me is very much just to trigger my mind as to when to sow different things, and to let me know as well when it's time to stop sowing, that we've done enough batches. If I sow any later than in June, July dates, then I'm not going to get them flowering when I need to, when the flower season is still happening. They'd be looking to flower far more over here if I was sowing down here, and that's far too late. We'll be starting to get winter weather and storms and rain and wind and things, and so my flower quality wouldn't be good. So there's no point. You have to have an end point where you know that that's it for sowing those kind of seeds. And also, it is very important to know that it's a guide, and life does get very, very busy. I know for me particularly, May is just a hugely crazy busy month, and sometimes things just slip a bit. You can also be going away on holidays. You might have things going on at home. You might have another job that gets very busy at a certain time of year, and you just can't get those batches in. And it doesn't matter if you maybe sowed in this week rather than this week. It's just a guide, and it's just to make you keep thinking, I do need to do some more succession sowings at some point fairly regularly to keep the flowers coming. But it's certainly not set in stone, and I know that there's periods here where I know that I'm away and I'm not going to be able to sow seeds then, so it'll just be tweaked by a week maybe, but it'll just give me a good chance to get flowers through the whole season.
And the last thing to mention is that you might have seen there that I have circled June and wrote biennials next to it. And the reason that I have done this is because that is when you need to start sowing your biennial seeds for flowers the following spring. So that is quite a thought, to think that your sowing seeds aren't going to actually flower this season, they're going to flower the following year. But it's really important to not miss that window of opportunity. So June, early July time, they're the perfect time to get your biennial seeds on. They'll put down good roots, they'll get on some good leafy growth, you'll plant them out by the end of the summer, and they'll go dormant over the winter, then spring back into life in March, April time, and then you'll be having flowers from them in May the following year. So that'll be May 2024 for us. And if you want to find out more about biennial seed sowing, I have a video on this that I did last June, and I'll pop it at the end of this video for you to click on the link and you can see that, because it's not that long now until we need to sow our biennial seeds. So if you're wanting to get any in, now is the time to be ordering your seed packets for that, so you're ready to go when we get to June.
Thanks so much for watching today. I hope you found it helpful seeing how I do some succession sowing here at Cloudberry Flowers. And really, it's just a guide to let you know that you'll get a lot more flowers from doing little batches of sowing throughout the season than if you just did a single sowing, say in April. If you did that like I did that first time 9 years ago, you get flowers at the end of the summer for a few weeks, but then you'll have missed the opportunity of having flowers as early as May or as late as September, October time. So definitely worth having a shot. Definitely a good idea to be writing things down and keeping a garden diary, because year on year, that's really going to help you to know when to sow your seeds and when things flower for you, because we're all different. And some things take a long, long time to flower. They might take a while for you to get germinating with the conditions you have. They might take a little bit of time to get going once you plant them out in the garden. They might get a bit of transplant shock and go dormant for a little bit and then get growing. So you might have quite a long time period before flowering. Or you might live in a warm climate where your irrigation is good, or you get lots of rain as well as the warmth, and things just grow really quickly and you get flowering much quicker. So all very individual, but the same things apply. Little batches regularly through the growing season, and that'll maximise the flowers for you. So next week we're going to be looking at another of the flowers in my individual series, and it's going to be about one of my top favourites, which is Nigella, and you might know it as Love in a Mist. So I'm looking forward to doing that for you then. And also just wanted to say a super big thank you to all my subscribers out there. When I started my YouTube channel a couple of years ago, I thought I'd be very lucky if I got 100 subscribers, and this week I have managed to hit 5,000, which is absolutely amazing to know that you're all enjoying my videos and following along with me. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do hit the like and subscribe button. It would be great to have you following along, and I really am enjoying speaking to you all every week. I know that there is a lot of people out there that I have that keep coming back every week and letting me know how they're getting on with their growing and letting me know they're enjoying the videos, and I really enjoy being in touch with you. So thank you very much to you all, and we'll see you next week.